There was a lot to ponder as I swirled around in the currents in that little coracle. Just like a tub it was, like that one on the Ganges in the dead of night when I'd nearly capsized, and God knows what would have happened to me if I had. But this is absurd. I had to laugh at the whole impossible situation in which I found myself, going uphill in a little tub which was going round and round like on some spinning ride at the fair, going uphill on a river to who knew where or why or how. If you want to go forward, you've got to go back. And if you want to go back, you'll have to proceed. It was painted in a childish hand on the beam which formed the lintel to the tunnel. The river had come to a standstill before what looked like an old mine shaft, pitch black beyond, its low entrance and the very last place on earth I wanted to go. Had I not just this morning been carried through all those other tunnels and emerged with such gratitude into the sunlight, into the upper, the lower, or whatever it is, and now I must go back into the dark? Admission 3 suddenly appeared on the lintel. I could see I was being given no choice after all. I had no volition. Things just happened, and I was carried away by them. 3 what? I wondered. 3 drachmas. An old woman's voice came from somewhere. I mean, from nowhere. Or 3 wishes, came the voice. Oh no, you're not having them. You can have the drachmas. Throw them into the water, came the voice. So I did, and the river started moving again. And as we passed through the low entrance, the whole tunnel lit up with many coloured lights from an unknown source. This is where your earthly fate derives, said a little pint-sized man walking along the river on a ledge. He was colourfully dressed and wore a red cap, reminding me of one of those pixies miners would talk about seeing in the tin mines of Cornwall. You are entering the incubation chambers of the metals and the planets. And he vanished. Up ahead, there came the sound of tinkering and hammering, and the hissing sound of a jet of flame. As we rounded a bend, did I say we? A giant shadow was thrown upon the ceiling, and the wall of the tunnel, and hunched over a forge in an alcove, was a being, dark as Caliban. My God, he was just like Mani. Mani was a gypsy of the Manouche tribe in France, with whom I'd lived in the time of my youth. He was short and stocky, and dark as Caliban, and full of oaths and curses, with malevolent piercing eyes which made you shrivel when they rested on you, lurking behind them some dark intent. From his fire, out behind the caravans, at some removed from them, for he was banished from the encampment when he was at his trade, there arose the foul smells of burning plastics and metals, such as one might be enveloped in an industrial city, and which just to inhale made you ill. And what with his limp and his constant spitting into the flames, he was not at all unlike Vulcan. Vulcan at his forge. There was something anarchic about him, as though he was one of the titans who had hacked his way up to the surface through rock and fire and ice, with the primitive clash of all the unredeemed metals, the iron, the lead, the tarnished copper, and the quicksilver, which lent him his cunning, all those metals running in his veins. I could see the agony of the forces he was contending with, and the inner fire which was trying to break out, and in doing so was consuming him. "It remains to be seen," he said, not looking up from his forge, on which a red-hot bar of iron was twisting and writhing. "And that's all," he said, as I drifted by in the coracle. What does he mean by that? What remains to be seen? Whereupon his sentence was finished inside my head, without my having thought it. What is to become of you? Just then a wind bit through me, and I suddenly wanted to scream. Where was I going? What was this place? I'd let myself be carried away by things over which I had no control. How could I? I had no volition. Just as in life I drifted along thinking I was in some sort of control, but things just happened. Hazard, you could call it. Hazard. That's what Heraclitus said everything was. Just hazard. They happened. And there seems to be no turning back now. What does all this mean? Does it mean anything? Am I being shown something? Was it really only last night I had that dream? And who was she that I obeyed her blindly and without thinking? If this is my fate, I suppose it must be, for it cannot be otherwise. And sooner or later, I was going to have to come here. How is it that I've been taking everything in my stride until now, when I've suddenly started to question it all and feel terribly afraid? It all seemed like a sort of picnic on the river before, and really quite entertaining, all the bizarre things which were happening, devoid of any logic. Who am I? Now I'm this and now I'm that, and then I'm something in between. You must be Hermes, I laughed, my mood suddenly lightening. That's me, if you can call it me, he confirmed. Now, where are you trying to get to? You know this way leads only one way, don't you? Unless you take the left-hand way. I'll take that. That's what I meant, he said. Only one way. Follow me. And here I was in the middle of Piccadilly waiting for Jenny. I had a colourful bouquet of freesias in my hand which was slightly trembling. You do know I'm married, don't you? She'd said that first time we'd kissed. I did. And now she was emerging out of the underground and looking around a little nervously, headed over to where I was standing. She looked ravishing. Her sleek black hair was swept behind her ears, and she was wearing a short black skirt and a tight-fitting black jacket, which she was buttoning up to her neck against the March wind. You must be careful down there, you really must, she said over a pint, as we sat in a corner of the old dormouse, just round the corner. I'd been telling her of the latest things which had been happening down under, as we called it, and how I'd just met Hermes. Watch out for him, he's tricky, she cautioned me. He'll be leading you towards Venus's realm. He relishes mischief. It's probably why we've got entangled. She gave me a wicked grin over the table and took my hand. I'm afraid, you know. I'm really afraid. But I can't help what I'm feeling, she went on. Do you remember that child's game with the board? That if you moved a magnet underneath the pieces on top would move, and if you took the magnet away, they would collapse. You see, I feel that that's what's happening to us. We can't help being moved. We have no volition. We have no will of our own. And I have the terrifying thought that everything's being arranged for us. That is an interesting thought, I smiled, but I rather like the arrangement. Everything's fate, after all. You're right, she laughed. Let's enjoy it. Later that night, lying in her arms in the little hotel room, she came back to the conviction that we were being shuffled around on a chessboard by unseen hands. I mean, what were the chances of us meeting? There were 1,000,000 to 1. You'd never have been at that party if it hadn't been for the most bizarre stream of events, and neither would I. Our streams met, I mused. Streams which were not behaving like normal streams. Streams going uphill, perhaps. Yes, it's all very relevant to what you've been encountering down there. You're not going back, are you? A tone of panic had come into her voice, and her eyes were tinged with copper as she suddenly looked anxiously into mine. Kata, I heard the command. Go down.